Hi, welcome back to Miss Music. Playing in there is the first track from Beaster by a band called Sugar. Now, if you were listening to music in the 90s, you may have come across Sugar. They had a very successful album called Copper Blue, and they made two other albums, and Beaster is one of those albums. Sugar was fronted by Bob Mould, formerly of Husker, someone who's had a really prolific solo career. He's probably not one of the best known artists, but his music, I think, is brilliant. Really rich, heavy guitar, punk influenced music. So, as I said, Copper Blue was quite a famous album in the 90s, and off the success of Copper Blue, Sugar went back into the recording studio and released Beaster in the same year, I believe, as Copper Blue. Beaster is an EP. It's about 30 minutes in length, and if you haven't heard it, it's definitely something to listen to if you're into this kind of post-punk guitar-driven angst music. I think it's fair to say that without Husker, without Bob Mould, then you probably wouldn't have groups like the Pixies, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, and the Foo Fighters. They've all been influenced by Bob Mould. So, whereas the more commercial Copper Blue was very short tracks, guitar-driven, rhythmic songs, Beaster is a much heavier album. It's guitar-driven, very heavy vocals, very heavy guitar, lots of distortion. And it takes a few listens to get into, to really pick out the underlying melodies that are lost underneath all this distortion when you listen to it the first few times. In the intro, you can hear that the album begins with acoustic 12-string guitars, quite jangly sounding guitars, reminiscent of the Byrds, but also of Husker Du. And that soon gives way to that really heavy, distorted, compressed guitar sound. And as the album progresses, the sound becomes more messy, more distorted, the vocals becoming almost a yell, a scream at times, before the album emerges into more melodic, tuneful tracks, as seen on the last two tracks of the album. It's very hard to hear the lyrics on this album. You're going to have to read the lyrics through as you listen to the music. And what the album is about is very hard to detect. For me, I've always seen it as a kind of break-up album. A lot of Bob Mould's songs are about relationships falling apart, and he tends to sing about these relationships with a lot of anger and hurt. And Beaster, to me, sounds very much like a relationship falling apart, and then gradually Bob Mould coming out of this suffering into a new dawn, if you like. However, rather than a break-up album, it could also be seen as a breakdown album. It's very dark, very brooding. It's got a lot of religious references in it. Judas Cradle, JC Auto, Jesus Christ Autobiography, with Bob Mould literally screaming for someone to hammer in the nails into his hands. And it's just great. I mean, it's a great album to listen to on headphones and just be assaulted by all this noise and angst. So let's listen to one of the tracks on the album, the track called Judas Cradle. And here the track begins with these incredibly tortured and twisted guitar sounds before Bob Mould screams over the top and then launches into his vocals. Have a listen. Now, on a personal level, one of the things that drew me, I think, towards Bob Mould, apart from the sound, which I love, and the angst and the anger in a lot of this music, which I also love, was the fact that growing up as a gay teenager, there seemed to be very little music that was speaking directly to me. There was a lot of gay bands like Culture Club, Bronski Beat, the Pet Shop Boys. But as a teenager, this was not the music I was into. This was kind of the pop music of the day. And at that time, my favorite album would have been Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden. So it was great suddenly to discover Husker Du and Bob Mould. And the fact that Bob Mould is a gay artist and making, guitar music, and I'd never come across that before. And I think that's one of the things that really drew me to listening to Bob Mould. Finally, you have someone singing about things you can relate to, but also singing about them in a style that you actually enjoy and like. I really love the uncompromising nature of Bob Mould and his lyrics, and just this very angry man. I don't know if Bob Mould is really that angry, but he always comes across in his music as being terrifically angry. And I'm going to play another song from the EP, which is called JC Auto, and I'm going to put the lyrics up because you can't really distinguish the lyrics listening to it for the first time. But I think the lyrics show you just how painful Bob Mould is experiencing, whatever crisis he's going through in his life at this time. So just have a listen to this. After literally screaming to be nailed to a cross on JC Auto, the album lifts considerably on the next track, which is called Feeling Better. So this is one of the less heavier songs on the album. It's got much more of a melody, a driving rhythm, and a really nice bass line underneath it. And if this is an album about breakups, then this is the point in a breakup where things do start feeling better and you're looking to the future. So have a listen to this. When I was listening to this album, I was living in Belfast at the time, and it was a very dark period. There was a lot of bombs going off. There were soldiers on the street. It was very miserable. People were being murdered. The weather was always raining and cold and wet. And I used to love walking through the streets of Belfast with this album playing on my headphones. It seemed to really fit with the mood of the city at the time. Now, the album ends with a track which is very much keyboard based, an organ, keeping with that religious feel of the whole album. And it seems a much more calmer, trippy vibe. It's kind of Beach Boy-esque in its structure. And it seems as if Bob has finally found some peace on this record. But the lyrics are walking away back to you, which seems to suggest that Bob has learnt very little throughout his journey through this anguished breakup, as he seems to be returning to the source of the anguish. And I think anyone who knows Bob Mould's work and has listened to his solo albums will realise that Bob Mould is rarely at peace. So thanks for watching. Have a listen to the last track on the album, and I hope you enjoy the album as much as I have.